Welcome. You're listening to
Next up is Voices of Change with your hosts, Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson. Voices of Change is to connect, inform, and empower people to engage in social political change. Right here on USALA Radio.
host Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson. Today we're having a special edition show. We're joined by co-host Aissia Richardson, and we're going to talk about two topics today. We're going to talk about at the city of Philadelphia, there's a current encampment around the intersection of 22nd Street and the Ben Franklin Parkway. And then secondly, we're going to talk about the voter issue, the voting issue going on currently in the city of Philadelphia, mail-in ballots, what's happening with that on that front, new polling places that have been added to assist with this massive voting ballot issue that we are currently being faced with. I believe that is going to surpass over 300,000. So we're going to talk about that in the second segment of the show. But the first segment of the show, Aissia, we're going to talk about this encampment. And this is an issue that has been going on since, I would say, June. It has been exacerbated currently. They're trying to figure out a way to end this encampment, but they've come across some stumbling blocks here in doing so. So the city of Philadelphia is trying to figure out what to do about an encampment that, as mentioned previously, around 22nd Street and the Ben Franklin Parkway. The encampment is described as a form of protest. City officials fear that it poses a health and safety threat, which I do agree with. For several months now, an encampment for homeless people has been set up along the Ben Franklin Parkway. And they have pledged to stay until the city provides permanent housing for all the residents. The city plans to clear the encampment. However, the city has not been able to find a common ground with the residents and its organizers. The encampment, Aissia, was originally, which I did not know, it was originally organized not by the homeless individuals, but by groups identifying themselves as the Workers' Revolutionary Collective and Occupy PHA. And so members have since recruited homeless individuals to be part of the encampment. So homeless outreach workers who visited the site to offer housing and services were asked to stay away. So obviously this is an intentional effort to ensure or to open up opportunities for people to get into housing in the city of Philadelphia, which we know there's a crisis. But I don't know if this is the right way to go about it, Aissia.
Yeah, you know what? I think that this is reminiscent of the encampment that happened during the Pope's visit on American Street, where it was an action as opposed to a opportunity to get people into permanent housing. It was an attempt to shine the light on our housing crisis, which we've been dealing with the housing crisis nationally for about 20 years because we haven't had a federal administration that has fully funded the Housing and Urban Development HUD, which is the funder for our local Philadelphia Housing Authority. And so I think you and I both know that there are 100,000 people on the Housing Authority's waiting list for affordable housing. Every year, about 5,000 people are wanting to be able to get into emergency housing. And then our shelter system is overburdened. We have people who actually sit up in chairs in our shelter system because our shelter system is overburdened. We have a affordable housing crisis. I think that it has been exacerbated by the economic downturn, which happened in 2009, 2008. And certainly things have been put in place during COVID to stay evictions and to stay mortgage foreclosures, which would exacerbate the problem even further because people are in crisis with their rent and in crisis with their mortgages because of being laid off. So the COVID funding, the COVID relief funding from the stimulus funds from the federal government did go to the state to be able to provide rental assistance and mortgage assistance, and the city is actually managing those programs. And so that funding is slowly is slowly getting out to folks and is causing folks not to to not be at this encampment. But any encampment is a problem because you have sanitary issues,
Mm-hmm.
you have increase in violence, you have safety issues, particularly if you have children at a space. And so it is something that is the shining the light on the issue is needed. I'm just not sure whether or not people can take a winter outside. I mean, even today, the temperature is a little, it's nice today, but prolonged exposure to cold weather, does have an impact. And that some of the organizers are not allowing the city's Office of Homeless Services and Housing Services to be able to do intakes and make sure that people can at least get into the intake system, is an issue. So yeah, I'd like to hear more about your thoughts on how the city can deal with this crisis. I mean, I think one of the things they were talking about was bulldozing the encampment, which I don't agree. I don't think that that's a good idea. But figuring out how to create more opportunities for people to, live with dignity who are poor is something that we need to work on.
Well, and you're right. But here's my issue, and I've harped about this over and over again on Voices of Change. How is it possible a first class city like Philadelphia, dealing with such a high poverty rate that we have in the city of Philadelphia? We're talking about over 46%. We have all of this development in the city of Philadelphia, pushing communities out of their own neighborhoods with this gentrification.
Hmm.
Obviously, I don't see it being a money issue, right? Or an economic issue when it comes to, all this development going on. Obviously, there's money being pumped into the city. My question is, and my issue is, my heartburn is what the city of Philadelphia can do to open up more opportunities for housing for people in the city. And I know that also has an attachment to the federal government funding and how much availability they have in terms of resources and funding that can funnel through the city of Philadelphia to make some of that stuff happen. And so this is an issue that needs to be addressed. And I don't know if anyone has a quick fix solution to this problem of the housing crisis that we have currently in the city. Now, the organizers, they oppose laws that prohibit encampments on public property and seek autonomy in allowing currently homeless or unhoused individuals to camp on city spaces without intervention. That cannot happen. There has to be order and there has to be structure to this process. So their demands don't seem to be appropriate or even, I would say, a common sense, if you will. But there has to be a coordination with the city officials and city government, PHA, and HUD to figure out a solution. And the other problem that we have is that housing availability has been closed off in certain communities because of this gentrification, Aisha. So
Yeah.
they can't, for example, in North Central Philadelphia, you cannot get housing. That has been
Hmm.
closed off because of all of this gentrification and all this construction going on in North Central Philadelphia. So they're pushing people out to the Northeast and to other communities, uh, and so that's another issue. But how we're going to coordinate services at the city, state, and federal level to open up these opportunities in housing for people of poor that cannot afford, um, you know, they can't afford to either to pay rent or to pay a mortgage, and now exacerbated by the COVID-19 situation. What say you?
Well, I mean, I think that some in some ways we're everything old is new again, and so the programs that your dad put in place, where the your dad and Milton Street were going into public put to property that was owned by the city, and sort of squatting in those properties, and then codified having the city turn over public um, homes that the city owned that people abandoned to people for $1, and then they fixed it up, and then they were able to have stable homes. There are people who bought those homes and whose families are doing really well. So one of the issues with that right now is that many of the public property that the city owns is vacant lots, but the people who do have homes, the entity that does have homes is PHA.
Right.
PHA has the scattered sites, which they're trying to get rid of, but it's an auction process, and you have to sort of be in the know to be able to purchase a property. They want you to purchase property in lots. They don't want you to do individual properties. And so if we could figure out a way to, and all of that is determined by federal guidelines. How PHA disposes of its property has to be, regulated by the federal government. So if we can figure out a way to be able to relax those regulations so that those properties that are habitable, that people can go into, that the PHA doesn't want to have the holding costs for anymore, nor the sealing and cleaning and removal of debris that happens when properties are abandoned. I think that may be part of the solution.
Yeah. And
Figuring out,
mhm.
yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, figuring out how to make it a win-win situation where we're getting people out off the street and into quality, stable, and affordable housing.
Well, and we have a lot of houses that are abandoned in the city of Philadelphia. I mean,
Me
and
too.
and so to your point of these regulations to deregulate the ability for people to have access to these houses, especially for someone that doesn't know how to navigate the system, becomes very
Hmm.
complicated. You and I know this. So they give opportunities to people, A, that have money, B, to the developers, and then people that know how to navigate. And so you're right. We need to have the ability to deregulate and make it more accessible for people to acquire these abandoned houses. And that's a big process to get to even get through, because it's complicated. When you're dealing anything that comes from the federal government, Aisha, it's
Hmm.
very complicated to get to navigate. And if we're
Yeah.
not simplifying things, and if we're not working in coordination with city officials, like what you're saying, to your point, how
Hmm.
then how are we going to address this issue and give
Right.
people access to housing, or these abandoned houses that are not in use, that can be that can be occupied by people that are responsible and looking for housing? That's my take on that.
Yeah, I mean, think it takes vision. It takes people who understand how to navigate policy. It takes people who are coalition builders. It takes people who know what the rules and regulations are and how to overcome, the stagnancy sometimes of federal, movement, policy movement. But there were other programs that the city put in place that were actually quite successful. The Philly First Time Home Buyers Program, the Philly First program, was a $10,000 grant for closing costs that the city just canceled on a Sunday and told people on Wednesday, if you're not going to closing by September 11th, you're not going to be able to get access to these resources. As far as I know, there was $8 million left in that funding source. So where did those resources go to? And the people who went through the process, who went through the housing counseling and saved their money and were able and were on the way to being first time home buyers, were left out in the cold. And that was a city council decision. City council made that decision to shut a very successful program down that was getting people out of rental situations and into home buying situations. And so I want to know, where did that money go? I want to know, how could you close a program on a Sunday and notify people that it's done on a Wednesday?
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah.
What happened with that? And I think that part of what we've been doing with Voices of Change is really shining a light on things and asking the hard questions, because when people contact us and are angry and upset about something, we need to be able to have the answers for them as well. And that was public money, and all of a sudden it just disappeared. It was a successful program. And that's the thing that really gets me upset too, is that when we have a successful programs and they're put in place, and we have all these success stories, both anecdotal and data driven,
Mm-hmm.
and then somebody comes in, some new administration comes in, or somebody decides, no, I want to play in that pot of money, or I want to play with that program, or I want to take credit for it, or you can't have credit for it. It affects the people.
Yeah.
It trickles down to the people, and it makes it more difficult for people to trust government, and it makes it more difficult for people to do the voter education and voter outreach to get people to come out and vote.
Right.
When government when you lose faith with the people who you're supposed to serve, how do you expect them to come out and vote?
Well, that's the heart of the question. When you lose faith in government and lose faith in the politicians that we elect into office, that are there to do the right thing and for the common good of the people, and when you're not doing that, and you're doing things that are not in the best interest of the people, then this is where you get voter apathy, especially in black and brown communities and Latino
Right.
communities, where they don't have
Mm-hmm.
faith in the system or faith in government because there's empty promises over and over again. This
Right.
housing issue, how many politicians have come forward when they're running for office, promising to address issues of housing, promising to alleviate certain burdens of people, especially around the housing issue here in the city of Philadelphia, and nothing
Mm-hmm.
ever gets done. And so you're
Mm-hmm.
right. People get angry, people get upset, and that affects, not only it affects people, it affects who gets into office, and it goes to the heart of this question of this presidential election, Aisha. And we have to be raw about this.
Mm-hmm.
President Donald Trump have said over and over again, and he says it very loud and clear and very intentional about what he says, that black and brown people in its majority are Democrats. And yet Democrats don't do anything for black and brown people. And I'm just playing the devil's advocate here for a minute, but
Right.
you know what? There's some validity to what he says. And your words have to be matched with your actions. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you have a radical individual like Donald Trump saying that to the public square, you pause for a minute and you think, well, wait a minute. This is a Democratic city who's been in control of the Democratic Party for more than 50 some years. And we don't see progress when it comes to poverty, when it comes to housing, when it comes to the minimum wage. We're still behind in Pennsylvania at 7.25. All of those issues have detrimental effect on the quality of life of people, you know? And so there's some validity to what he's saying, and these things have to be addressed. And ultimately, the responsibility falls back on people we elect to government. That's a reality. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Donald Trump is a McDonald's president. He's a president. No,
Yeah,
seriously,
yeah.
he's a president that everything is ready in 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Like he's a president that everything is pre-prepared and it is packaged and it is, it's just there in 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So I think that one of the things that we have to do as voters and as folks who are interested in the what goes on in the long term is be able to articulate to voters the long term view, the long term aspects of what it means to be a person of color and actively engaged in political life and in civic life.
Yeah.
So you look at I always think about I'm gonna go back to your dad again. I'm gonna go back to like the 70s. I'm gonna go back to how people were living and what our communities looked like then. I mean, in a very true sense, our communities did look like war zones. I mean,
Yeah.
we had property owners that were abandoning their properties in places like the Bronx and setting them on fire for the insurance money. I mean, for a long time, for a decade, the Bronx was on fire, and it caused really serious health issues and health disparities in that community. Philadelphia, we had abandoned cars, abandoned vehicles. We had, housing infrastructure that was crumbling, and it was people like your dad, people who understood how important it was to deal with quality of life issues, so that we could stabilize people to be able to get them into, better paying jobs, better education outcomes, and move them out of poverty into the next class, the middle class and upper middle class. And so I think that that's a generational view. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you look at our communities in the 1970s and you look at our communities now, there is a market difference in our incomes. There's a market difference in our home ownership. Although actually in the African American community, home ownership has been about 26% even since the 70s. So in a way, we're still flat. But I think that when you look at the long term and when you look at what it is that our elected officials care about and what kind of policy they have put forward to be able to impact change in hostile environments, because Harrisburg is hostile. The Senate and the House are both controlled by Republicans, and so being able to get through the kind of legislation that Jordan Harris got through with clean slate legislation and wiping those criminal those things that were not guilties, and those things that were misdemeanors off of people's records so that they could get jobs at their skill level, I
Mm.
think is critical. But clean slate was only done in 2018. But your dad and those folks who were part of the political movement that got folks into office to be able to sit at the tables. I always say to people, if you're not on the table, you're on the menu,
Right.
right? But
Right.
in a lot of ways, Leslie, people like me and you, we bring the damn table,
Yeah.
right? We bring the tables, we bring the chairs,
Right.
we bring everything that's
Everything.
needed to be able to
That's right.
build our communities. And so I think that is not recognized enough. And we need to make sure that we're articulating to voters that we bring a lot to the table, and God damn it, we bring the table.
Well,
We bring the table. We bring the table to the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party needs to recognize how important our votes are by supporting the policies that are important to us, like affordable health care, like affordable housing, like quality public education, like making sure that our schools don't have lead and asbestos.
mm,
There was a time where there was lead and asbestos in our homes, but it was people who were fighting for our young folks who were, suffering from debilitating illnesses and behavioral health issues because of lead in our homes. It wasn't Republicans that dealt with lead; it was Democrats. So we need to make sure that we're telling those stories and tooting our own horn about the things that we care about, so that folks can come on board and say, "Yeah, I do care about those things. I do remember, having to go and get lead tested. I do remember, having to, take extra medicine, or I do remember having to, being in a home where I had to force my landlord to do lead abatement. And now you can't rent a place to a person with a child without having a lead abatement certificate. So those are the things that I think that we need to make sure that we are, articulating strongly to folks who are newly voting and who may be disengaged from the voting process, like some of our formerly convicted folks.
yeah. And that's another segment that we can do, just talking about folks that come out, this issue of criminal justice reform. And when they do come out, post incarceration, there's issues there, housing
Hmm.
issues, uh, work issues. So
Hmm.
it's issues that need. Uh, I think that we need to find solutions to, but like you said, we have to have the people, the power players, to be at the table, to have
Right.
these discussions, so that we can move the needle on all of these issues, especially
Hmm.
this housing crisis, Aisha, that we've been dealing with this for years. And
Right.
I think we know how to solve this housing crisis. I think we know, and we just need to do it. Find a
Mhm.
way to do it, and I think it's planning, is having
Mhm.
long-term goals around this, how to do this. And I sometimes I feel it's like laziness is not having the fire in the belly to say, okay, let's grab the bull by the horn and let's just do this. And I think sometimes it's just pure laziness on the politicians' part to do this. And I don't know what else, how to view it, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes, folks get bogged down by, defeat. I mean, it's hard to get legislation passed. It's hard to deal, and there's a lot of things about policy that aren't the things that are quote unquote sexy,
Well,
right?
and
But
they're broken too when it comes to policy. I mean,
and
yeah,
they're broken, and
yeah,
they're like our criminal justice system. So
yeah.
we have broken policy, and folks are trying to weave in and out of broken policy. And I think that we need to have transformative conversations. I think
Absolutely.
we have to have conversations about not fitting into something that is broken, a model that's broken, but I think that we need to break the mold.
Well,
And I think that we need to come up with policy that makes sense, that is people putting people first, and that has an injection of humanity in it.
yeah,
And so often our policy is about protection,
yeah.
protection
It has
of
no humanity.
industry.
It has
It
no
has no humanity.
in it, right?
It's corporate protection.
That's it.
It's this layered piece that has to do with liability.
Yeah.
And I think that part of our challenge is to honestly, we need some transformative thinking.
Well, I think
And I don't think that transformative thinking is getting rid of HUD. I don't think it's about getting, like eliminating HUD, but I think that that we need to really identify and create some kind of task force that looks at total transformation.
yeah. I think you know what. One of the things that I think the essential first steps to increasing, I would say, the supply of safe and affordable housing I think we must look, or we must include in that, Aisha, federal, state, and local funding for
Hmm.
that. That I think that's the first essential part to this process. Flexible funds, such as,
Hmm.
let's talk about the community development block grant,
Hmm.
and home programs for local governments to address critical affordable housing needs. That should be looked at as a possible solution. Or expanded investment in new affordable rental housing through increased allocation and value of federal low income housing tax credit. That's another way we can look at this. Or the creation of a new state low income housing tax credit, that you can set aside for the preservation of at risk rental housing. That's a possible
Hmm.
solution. We can also look at the new flexible rental assistance to reduce homelessness and housing instability. And there's money for that. There is money for that. Or capital for community development financing institutions to provide flexible, low cost financing for the development of new affordable housing. So these are ways, like you said, Aisha, that we can get a task force together
Hmm.
that can look at these issues and then come up with solutions to add or increase more money for these programs that can probably help reduce this housing crisis that we have.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that things that are simple, and I'm not a housing expert by
Me
any
either.
means,
Me either. Yeah.
but I think but I like to use common sense when approaching things. And I think that we should be also looking at the property transfer tax and
Mm.
seeing whether or not we can dedicate 0%, 0.1% of the property transfer tax into a housing trust fund.
Yeah.
Like there are ways to be able to look at revenues and be creative about how we need to look at using those revenues to stabilize our neighborhoods. Because the reality is that if we don't invest in our neighborhoods, then everybody falls down, because we're in a boat, and it's sinking. And if
Yeah.
we don't figure out ways to be able to plug the holes to bail it out, then we are all going to sink together,
Let
regardless of where we are on the economic
front.
stream.
Yeah.
You
Let
know,
me let let me
so
let me
yeah.
ask you a question, Aisha. What do you think about this? The possibility of increasing, because you worked in the nonprofit world for a long time,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
you know there's nonprofits that they get into the affordable housing development section.
Hmm.
What talk to me about any type of capacity building for nonprofits to get into more affordable housing and development. What say you about that?
You know, there is the Housing Alliance, the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania pulls together all of the community development corporations and nonprofit organizations that are doing housing development, and they create policy recommendations. They meet regularly to talk about best practices. And I mean, I think that there are entities that are already in place that make really good policy recommendations about how to support sort of this nonprofit support of government. I mean, because the reality is that government can't do it alone. Clearly, they can't do it sometimes at all. So the nonprofits sort of pick up where government leaves off because they maybe they just don't have the capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So the nonprofits are important partners with public and private entities to be able to put quality housing stock on the market.
Mm.
It is important to have those nonprofit partners in the room. And I think that sometimes they are focused so much on their work that they rely on other folks to talk about policy, but certainly their anecdotal experiences and their like looking back and looking and seeing what best practices are and how government can be more supportive of their work is something that's important. And I mean, I would welcome the opportunity to pull together folks who are experts in this field to figure out again how do we address it systemically, and how do we codify some of those recommendations so that we can get actual movement and move the needle.
Well, not only that, pathways for home ownership
Right.
and community ownership for Black and Brown residents and Latino. That
Hmm.
you know, you experienced that yourself, and now today you can say you are a homeowner because a
Hmm.
pathway and opportunity was presented to you, and you were able to hone on that. So,
Hmm.
and definitely, lacking affordable housing in Philadelphia, we know is an issue. We're talking about almost 5,700 people living either in a homeless shelter or on the streets or even living in a vacant building. So I
Right.
know I know though, Aisha, and I was reading this somewhere where I believe that the city controls certain houses that is not owned by PHA, and I
Hmm.
think some of the folks that have been part of this encampment, they have been occupying those spaces or those houses that are controlled by the city. Maybe that's an option if you can't go through PHA or through the federal government with all these regulations. The houses that are owned by the city, open that up. I mean, that can be a possible solution to all of this.
I mean,
To some of it.
I, I agree. I mean, I think that there is some housing stock that the city has control of that can be put back into use. I mean, that whole dollar home program was all about making sure that people rehab those homes and they weren't using it to sell it at a higher price, but they were using it as their own homes. And I mean, and that policy that was created where you had a certain amount of years to rehab the property and then you had to stay in the property for a certain amount of years worked. It really did work. So bringing back policy that works, I think, is part of the key to success. Because in as we examine this issue and we look at how devastating it is to be unhoused, we have to look at what did work and figure out how do we tweak it so that it works even better.
Absolutely. Listen, you're listening to Voices of Change on Usula Radio with your host, Leslie Acosta and Aisha Richardson. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the voting, uh, actually on its way now as we speak across this country. So we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back, and we'll get to that issue when we come back.
Don't wait. Communicate. Make your emergency plan today.
Welcome back. You are listening to Voices of Change on Usula Radio with your hosts, Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson. Before the break, we were talking about the encampment for the homeless people. They have set up shop at Ben Franklin Parkway. They have been there for quite some time now, and they have no intentions, I believe, in disbanding the site. And with that comes, I know that the city has been planning to clear the encampment. However, the city has not been able to find a common ground with the residents and its organizers. So this has created kind of, I would say, a problem, not only for the city of Philadelphia and for the elected officials, but for the residents that are in that area. Because with these types of encampments, there's a host of things that comes along with that. You have crime that comes. I believe 2 females were assaulted. There was a stabbing. There's a health crisis potentially. With having people in close proximity to each other, given the COVID-19, where we need to be practicing the social distancing and all of that good jazz. But switching gears here for a minute, let's talk about voting. Aisha, here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we were having this discussion on the Republican zone. We had Al Smith, the commissioner, on the Republican zone talking about this voting and how, this mail-in voting has become very cumbersome for the city of Philadelphia. It's something new for them, something that they were not expecting. But hopefully this is going to be okay. People voting are not going to be disenfranchised. They're expecting a high volume. In fact, I believe, according to the commissioner, Al, the city already has about 275,000 mail-in ballots that have been mailed thus far. So in a presidential election like this, a high-profile election like this one, we are talking about over 600,000 between mail-in ballots and people voting in person. What say you?
So I'm really excited to talk about this because the Trump administration has done a lot to disenfranchise voters by putting out negative information,
That's right.
by tampering with the U.S. mail system. And so I'm glad that Pennsylvania won its court case against the Trump administration around our ballots. The only issue that we lost was around the security envelopes, the secrecy envelopes. So in our mail-in ballots, there are 2 envelopes. And so our ballots need to be completed, they need to be signed, and then they need to be put into a secrecy envelope. That secrecy envelope has to be mailed back or dropped off at your county board of elections. So you don't want to have a naked ballot. You want to make sure that that naked ballot means that your ballot isn't in the secrecy envelope. We are also very fortunate that we are our state. You can register to vote get your mail-in application and vote on the same day. And so that's really exciting because you can early vote. By September the 29th, you can vote in person at 7 different locations, and these locations will be open 7 days a week. Starting on September the 29th, the hours of operations will be from 11:30 in the morning till 6:30 at night, Monday through Thursday, and 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 Monday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The locations are at City Hall, room 140. They're in Center City, in the far northeast at George Washington High School at 10175 Bustleton Avenue. In North Philadelphia at the Leo Corr Center on Temple's campus at 1776 North Broad Street. In the Northwest at Roxborough High School, which is at 6498 Ridge Avenue. In the Southwest at Tilden Middle School at 6601 Elmwood Avenue. In the Upper North Philadelphia at Julio de Burgos Elementary School, and that's at 401 West Lehigh. And in West Philadelphia at Overbrook Elementary School at 2032 North 62nd Street. And if you missed all of that, then you can give the city commissioner's office a call at 215-686-3460. That's 215-686-3460. And so this is really exciting news that we have 7 locations where you can drop off your mail-in ballot or request your mail-in ballot and then do the ballot and vote right there in the city commissioner's office. There is an expectation that there will be 10 additional sites opened up across the city to make it even more convenient. And as that information comes to us, we'll make sure that we send it out to listeners of Voices of Change. So
I believe 15 satellite offices were proposed by Lisa Dealey, the other city commissioner, to be established throughout the city of Philadelphia, in addition to the 15, Aissia? Is that right?
So she proposed 15 satellite offices, and 6 were approved today at their board meeting. Okay. So the reason why I'm saying that these others will come online is because as these offices are used, I believe that the city commissioners will realize and recognize that they need to be in more areas of the city. One of the city commissioners predicts that there's going to be 75% voter turnout, which is historic in the city.
Yeah.
Historic.
Yeah.
So this is something that, this issue with the mail-in ballots is, I think, something that we really need to keep folks educated about. I think that we also need to make sure that folks know that the deadline to register to vote is October the 19th. The deadline to submit your mail-in ballot is the 27th. But I want to make sure that people do their early application and early submitting their ballots back to in the mail, so that there's no confusion about when the ballots should be received. Also, the governor extended the deadline for the ballots to be received by the county boards of elections. So typically your mail-in ballot had to be received by the end of the polling day on election day. And so the governor extended it 3 more days. So even if you mail your ballot, you have 3 more days before it's not accepted. But the reality is that in the last election, close to 200,000 ballots were thrown out.
Wow.
And I believe that that's in the primary. So the close to 200,000 ballots either didn't have the security envelope, or they were received by the county boards of election too late. And we don't want that to happen, because in the 2016 election, I believe that that Trump only won by 40,000 votes. So we have to stop all of the noise that is being done by the Trump administration in Pennsylvania about preventing people to vote. We have to go and vote early and talk to our neighbors and let them know what the truth is about getting out and voting, and that we should not allow any barrier to prevent us from exercising our civic responsibility.
Okay, so just to recap, what Aissia was saying, that these locations that she mentioned previously, that the voters could register to vote and request a mail-in ballot in person,
Yep.
receive their ballot,
Yep.
vote, and return it all
Yep.
in one visit.
All in one visit.
Okay, so we
All in
have to
one
repeat
visit.
that all in one visit.
Yes.
And these
All.
offices, these satellite offices that have been approved, you can do all this. And you can do this before what date again, Aisha?
September 29th
O-
is when the ballot should be ready. Yes,
Okay,
September
so
29th. But call the phone number to the board of county board of elections ahead of time just to make sure that the ballots are ready. If you do want to vote in person and vote early, and I think that the thing that we need to really make sure that we get across to people is vote early and have a plan. Have an A plan, have a B plan, have a C plan.
yeah,
Plan your vote this year because it is critical that our voices are heard
or
and
not
that they're not
suppressed. And
suppressed.
not suppressed. And I want
Hmm.
to mention, I mentioned this in the Republican zone earlier, and I'm going to mention this again. Trump had tweeted on July the 30th that universal mail in voting, not absentee voting, will be the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history. So what I want to say to you is that he's already claiming, he's already throwing out there that if he loses this election, it's going to be because of fraud in big cities like Philadelphia, uh, Chicago, and all these the big cities primarily. So I'm throwing that out there, Aisha, because he's already been saying this, and he's been saying this for quite some time. And mail-in voting is very huge in this election because of the COVID-19.
So if that were true, why does he and his family vote by mail?
That's a good point. That's an excellent.
If you don't trust voting by mail, why do you do it?
Yeah, but even even
So
even Al Smith, the city commissioner, he actually responded back and said, the election will be held on November the 3rd, and
mhm,
whether in person or mail, people are going to vote,
people are
regardless
going
of.
to vote.
Yeah,
People are going to vote, and I would say without any qualifications, voting by mail is safe.
exactly.
It is safe. If it's safe for Trump, it's safe for you.
Well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, don't you think?
I think so. And so if you don't believe in something, then why are you doing it?
Right.
Because clearly you believe in it for 100%. Because 100% of the votes in your since you've been in office and your family is by mail.
Well, it's
So if
okay.
you don't,
It's okay for him to steal the election, but it's not a, it's okay for him. It's a one-sided thing, don't you think?
it is. And this is a man who's a consistent liar and a cheat. He's a liar and a cheat.
Yeah.
So why would anybody believe a liar and a cheat just because it sound? I mean, what he says doesn't even sound good. It sounds ridiculous.
Yeah.
But he
Well,
has a platform.
right. Yeah.
He has a platform.
Well,
That's it.
he has it.
He's got a box that he sits on, that he stands on, and it's the media. And don't believe the hype.
Right. Right. Don't believe the hype. Like, don't drink the Kool-Aid, like they say.
Don't drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
Voting is safe.
It,
Voting by mail is safe.
yeah. Let me just say this other thing. There was this big hoopla about providing funding to the post office to get these these ballots in. Any status on that? Have you heard anything on
Well,
that front?
yeah, I mean, I talked to a postmaster general, the on Friday, and her response was, vote mail, political mail is first class mail. It gets, even if they have to drive it themselves, the supervisors make sure that it gets to where it needs to go. So there's a commitment by our postal service workers to make sure that every ballot gets counted. This issue of disparaging our postal workers who make sure we get our bills, our checks,
Yeah.
our medication.
Yeah.
They're committed to their jobs. They're working on Sundays. I have never in my lifetime remember receiving mail on
On
Sundays, but
Sunday. Yeah.
consistently I have received mail on Sundays. So I cannot disparage the US postal system. I disparage the people who are the Trump administration appointees, but not the people who work for the postal system. They care about their jobs. They do their jobs. They're going to make sure that our mail gets to where it needs to go.
Well, you're listening to Voices of Change on Usula Radio with your host, Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson. Have another question. I think Congress was asking for $25 million to funnel the money to the post office just to sustain this massive amount of mail that's coming through. What's the status on that? I've not heard. I think that we're going to take a vote, but I believe the president was against funding or giving all this type of funding to the post office. Do you know what's the status on that?
As far as I know, that was attached to new COVID relief funding, new COVID stimulus money. So all of that new COVID stimulus money is being held up right now. So the only thing that I would encourage our listeners to do is to get in touch with their elected officials at the federal level, their congresspeople, and just reinforce to them how important it is to get that stimulus money back out, particularly to our small businesses. Our small businesses are suffering. Those folks who do entertainment, they have banquet facilities, our caterers, those folks, they're suffering. And we need to make sure that we're getting those resources out to folks so that they can figure out how to reconfigure their businesses, because I'm telling you, we're going to be with this pandemic for the next 2 years, probably. Our lives will never be the same. And these businesses, they need to be able to reconfigure so that they can figure out how to make sure that they are hiring locally and buying locally, because the people who are the ushers, the people who the service providers, their suppliers, they're coming from our local businesses. If those entertainment entities can't support themselves, then they can't support our local businesses either.
Yeah. So all this stuff is important stuff. Everything is happening simultaneously, Aisha, and we just have to be prepared, and people have to be informed. And the only way you are empowered is if you are informed. So this is an important election, and we need to reiterate that we have to come out and vote. Sitting at home is not an option.
No,
sitting at home, it's too much going on in the world, and we need leadership at the White House. We need direction at the White House. This divide that we have, this racial divide that we have in this country, the rhetoric that's coming out of the White House currently has this country divided on all fronts. On all fronts, economically, race wise, we're divided all over, and we need leadership. And so if you're not satisfied with what you're seeing and hearing every single day that's coming out of this White House and out of this president, we've got to come out and vote. You've got to exercise that right to vote, and you have to do it now. You can't sit and wait, because everything hangs on the ballot. Your future hangs on the ballot. Our education hangs on the ballot. Our economics hangs on the ballot. So all of these issues are hanging on the ballot, and if you want change, you have to come out and vote. Is that right, Aisha?
It is, and we have our just like our Latino communities, our Hispanic communities, our African American communities, our Asian communities. They're not homogenous. They're diverse, and sometimes we have issues with each other, but not right now. Not right now. All beefs off the table. Every single beef off the table. Right. We have to come together and be unified and speak with one voice and say, no more are we going to accept the lies that make us divided. We're going to come together. We're going to come together in love, and we're going to vote the ticket, and we're going to vote the down ticket ballots too, and make sure that we change the Congress, and we change the House of Representatives, and we change the Senate, because we need to be able to have our voices be heard. We can't get the things that we want accomplished if we don't vote, because that vote is our voice.
And the other issue is that it's too late to talk about that on this segment. Maybe at the next segment of Voices of Change is the new appointment that's come into the Supreme Court. That unfortunately, one of the Ginsburg, she passed away, and so we now have to appoint a new person in that seat. and obviously is going to be someone conservative. And guess what? The Senate has the vote to pass, to get someone confirmed quickly. I don't know if it's going to happen by 2020, but it's definitely an appointment. A selection is going to be made, and that appointment is going to be made by Donald Trump, and it's going to be a conservative judge or a Supreme Court justice.
We need to talk about what the repercussions of that are going to be on the Republican side. Let's have a conversation about that at the next time we talk, because
that's going to be important.
That's a loaded conversation.
That's a loaded conversation, and we don't have time to discuss that today. But thank you for joining us today. You are listening to Voices of Change on Usula Radio with your hosts, Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson. We'll see you. We'll talk to you, and we'll view you, and we'll hear you. Hopefully, you know what, Aissia, I would like to do? I would like to have folks chime in onto our radio show and promote the show and have people chime in, eventually give them our information so they can call in and ask us questions that we can answer. I think that's something that we would like to, that interaction is important for this show. So thank you once again, and we'll see you at our next show on Voices of Change. Have a great day.
Next up is Voices of Change with your hosts, Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson. Voices of Change is to connect, inform, and empower people to engage in social political change. Right here on Usula Radio.